Welcome, everyone, to our special micro summit, Closing Gaps, Expanding Opportunity, AI, Technology, and Educational Equity. This is a presentation of the Council of State Governments Eastern Regional Conference and the result of a joint effort between the region's Council on Communities of Color and its Education Policy Committee. More information on CSG East can be found at csg-erc.org. I'm Charles Ellison, Policy Consultant and Director for the CSG East Council on Communities of Color, host for this event, and I'm joined by co-host Debbie Ann Page, who's a Policy Advisor Consultant and Director for the CSG East Education Committee. We're providing you with what we're calling a curated conversation of select participants, including experts, educators, and state policymakers. All of them will prepare us for a broader discussion on this same topic during our upcoming CSG East annual meeting, which will be held in San Juan, Puerto Rico this December. The micro summit is arranged in 3 containers. So we'll start first with insights from our experts. Debbie?
Thank you, Charles. My name is Debbie Ann Page. I am the policy staff for the CSG East Education Policy. And I'd like to introduce our panelists, Julianne Lewis Anderson, who is a former educator and coach who writes about the intersection of culture and politics with education and human development. She's also a Public Voices Fellow of the Op-Ed Project in partnership with the National Black Child Development Institute. And Cami Hughley, who is a former educator and nonprofit leader, who has spent her career helping teachers bridge the gap between literacy theory and classroom practice. She's also a Public Voices Fellow of the Op-Ed Project in partnership with the National Black Child Development Institute. And kind of towards the end of this particular session, we'll have joining us is Rafiq Kaloun Ibdeen, who is the founder and managing partner for the Ember Charter School for Mutual Education, Innovation, and Transformation located in Brooklyn, New York. And I've dropped the link to Julianne and Cami's article, of which this kind of is helping to shape this particular conversation, as well as a link to Ember Charter School, just so you can have some more information about it. If you can't see the links, then I'll copy them and redrop them. Just let me know. Charles.
Hey, thanks, Debbie. Really appreciate that. So let's kick off our micro summit. Julianne and Cami, can you each offer your background as it relates to this topic? Very curious as to what drew you both to this in the first place. Julianne?
Hi, everybody. I think it's afternoon some places. I'm based in New Orleans, so nice to meet you all. I was an educator for a decade, and I taught in New Orleans charter networks. I taught at 3 different networks. And throughout those networks, I consistently had some of the same issues. I taught social studies, which wasn't directly funded and supported with structured curriculum or scripted curriculum, the way ELA and math was. And I spent a lot of time struggling to create and write my own curriculum. So after I received my master's at Xavier and all of the boom came out around generative AI, I thought to myself, would AI have helped me and supported me as a first-year educator? Would it have made my job easier, right? My first 2 years, I taught 120 kids a day. Like every single day, I taught 120 young people who had different levels of academic ability, different levels of emotional ability. And my question was, when I saw the headlines, Black children are using AI, Black children and teachers are substituting learning with AI, I was really interested in the story behind the narrative that was being pushed, right? Because it seemed like it was being used to demonize, when in context, when Cami and I did more research, we realized it was being used to supplant and supplement in different areas where Black educators and teachers needed more support, like I did when I was a young teacher.
Yeah, thank you, Cami. Julianne. Cami, just some of your background also and your interest in this topic.
Very similar to Julian. I started my career as an educator. In Prince George's County, Maryland through Teach for America, where I taught Head Start, and then relocated back home to South Florida, where I am based. I live in West Palm Beach, and I taught Head Start again. I'm in Broward County Public Schools, and then I made the segue from teaching early childhood to teaching high school intensive reading. And that shift in students' acquisition of language really started to make me think more about AI and its usage in the classroom. And so oftentimes there's that stat of if children are reading on grade level by third grade, the gap widens, and making the jump for early childhood to teaching high school intensive reading, I really started to see that. And then I started working in the education nonprofit sector. And then all of a sudden in the last few years, we're starting to see like this boom, even within the education nonprofit sector in regards to AI usage. More organizations are creating their own chatbots to support educators in implementing their various curricula. And then my husband also works in digital marketing. And so he and I would start having conversations about how is AI not only impacting how people are being advertised to, but how children are also being advertised to as well. And I started to read more and more about it. And it also, still working with children in a volunteer capacity in local elementary schools, I started to see like how technology in general is having an impact in the classroom.
Debbie, I'll pass it off to you.
So I'm just thinking what AI looks like as a tool in the classroom, not just, I mean, I know we're using it as you're saying that like teachers are using it as a stopgap in a lot of spaces. And I'm wondering what it looks like as a tool in the classroom. And is there a right and wrong way, and what that right and or wrong way looks like? And this goes to both you, Cammie, and Juliet.
Cammie, I can take educators and you can take young people if you want. Does that work?
Sure. Is there a right and a wrong way to use it? I think I really don't like saying, well, it depends. It depends. But oftentimes that tends to be an answer. When it comes to children using AI, I've seen AI being used in a myriad of different ways. First, we know there's like studies and research coming out, and even articles coming out that children, I think I read something where up to 21% of young children, which is up to age 8 years old, have used AI in some capacity in school. And when you think about an 8-year-old is either in second or third grade. And so it says up to, so children even younger than that age are engaging in AI usage. That usage includes like, how do I draw this thing? And so I'm seeing more and more conversations around how is AI impacting children's creativity, if they're resorting to AI to, I guess, like supplement, or in some cases, even thinking about replacing their imagination if they're struggling with coming up with ideas on how to generate their own artwork. And so I'm seeing AI usage in that regards, or even with older students, more like secondary, middle, and high school students are using AI to generate ideas in regards to writing essays. And I don't know if you all have been hearing about what we're calling in the United States a learning recession, but some folks are putting some of that onus on the usage of AI and what it's doing to students' ability to be able to become those critical thinkers that we're looking for in this current time.
I'll follow up with what Cammie said. And I think it's important to note that, and Debbie, maybe I want to ask a confirming question. You're talking about specifically generative AI, right? Like a Claude, a ChatGPT. Okay, because it is important to understand that teachers have used AI, to some degree when you talk about differentiated learning in certain curriculums. I would say the right way, if there's a right way to use it, is to really account for the lack of coaching that teachers might be receiving in their classrooms. So classroom and school coaches are very important in providing a couple things. One, behavior instruction. Two, understanding of content and curriculum. And then three, really understanding the young people in your class. But unfortunately, a lot of these teachers, whether they're novice or veteran educators, have not received and do not receive the coaching that they need to do these parts of their job effectively, right? So this could look like an educator saying, hey, or like asking ChatGPT, can you unpack this standard for me? Or specifically saying, hey, what are the gaps in learning I should be considering when I'm teaching this specific population? You could even say something like, I'm teaching fifth grade. Many of my young people don't know what a map is. And this is a real story. Like my fifth graders did not know that blue on the map was water, right? So you can imagine like all of the different issues that created. That's helpful to get you to understand your population in your classroom, right? You can also say, what can I do if I have a young person on the spectrum, if I have a young person with a neurodivergence? What you cannot then do is say, and I'm gonna use people's names. So sorry, Senator. You can't say Ron Watson reads at a second grade level and we are in ninth grade. He has a reading level of fourth, right? How do I get him there? You can't do that because that really creates a privacy concern, right? There's still a large gap in what we know about where this data goes for young people. And it is not, as the data and the technology evolves, so will the hackers, right? And the people who want access to the data. And this has happened to multiple school districts. So I'm not trying to be an alarmist and saying that hackers will steal data and then sell it back to you, right? Because it is very important. That's happened at sheriff levels, it happens at the government, and it happens at school districts. And so if there's going to be training for teachers around chat usage, there needs to be conversations around broad statements, not specific young people, not specific cognitive disabilities, because we're still unclear about where that goes. I think the second thing that's really important is that we're not using AI to confirm biases that we already have about young people. And that's really important because it has been proven that chatbots have a racial slant. They also have an anti-girl or female slant. They also have an anti-Southern slant, right? And so what these chatbots are doing are sometimes providing dangerous stereotypes and using those stereotypes to infuse as facts and underpinnings for your pedagogical practice. Does that make sense, or do I need to clarify any of that?
I also want to go back to a point that you made, Julie, about educators in general using it. And so when we think about Black students across the country are disproportionately taught by novice educators being folks that have been in the classroom for 1 to 2 years. And so to Julian's point, some educators are using AI, but we haven't really talked about the experience of those educators who are using AI, right? So where I live in Florida, at least 30% of Black students are enrolled in schools with a high concentration of early career educators. And so with that being said, there's potentially a large population of Black children who are being disproportionately impacted by AI and its effects.
I do see a hand from Representative Darisha Parker.
I definitely did. And thank you for this panel. I think the thing that really kind of frustrates me to what she just said was we're lawmakers. So we are literally here to write, based on this conversation, think about policy and write things to implement into law. But the mere fact that you're telling me that a child doesn't even know that a color on a map is water, we're in a greater problem right now. So before we even talk about AI, the basics and the fundamentals of the reading, the writing, arithmetic, and phonics has been surpassed because technology in certain places, people are assuming that children are educated. And I feel that they're putting tablets and phones in front of children instead of books and teaching them. Because my whole thing is, you can't tell me about Johnny Tablet if Johnny can't even spell tablet, Apple, Microsoft, and all of the other programs in it. So I think that's the part for me that I'm trying to wrestle with. If a child doesn't even know the fundamentals of a lake, or that is a lake, or even know that there's 50 states, then what are we really talking about? I think that was one of the things that kind of struck a light bulb in me. Wait a minute, we're talking about technology and they can't even understand what the acronyms are and can't even spell it. Then what does that actually mean for us as lawmakers? Because again, the practicality that everybody is talking about, I surely do not want to have certain legislations and laws that I'm getting those experts from a ChatGPT and AI, because that's going to be the way that certain peoples are talking about. Thank you.
Right. No, Representative Parker, I think you bring up something very important, and Cammie and I touch on it in our article. Very specifically, ChatGPT, in a sense, should be used to, let me back up. ChatGPT should not be used to replace fundamentals. And I want to be very clear about that. We talk a lot about we don't want Black children to be left behind, correct? That is fair, and that is a fact. What we don't see is a lot of evidence about their counterparts of other colors or their counterparts internationally who are using AI at the very fundamental levels, right? When we're talking about a 0 to, I would argue, 8 or 9 years old. So if we're thinking about developing the fundamental skills, when it comes to lawmaking, I really do think this is a place, and I don't like to give you all homework, right? But where you really can look and speak to
That's why we're here. Give us the homework. Let's go.
the educators in your district, right? Do they feel this is the best use of you all's resources and time, right? Like, who watches Abbott Elementary? No, y'all gotta get in. Y'all gotta get some joy, okay? We've seen Abbott Elementary where the new technology is introduced, and Janine is standing there like the ceiling has collapsed. Thank you for the tablet, but the ceiling has collapsed, right? And so I think it's figuring out in each district, what do educators feel like is the highest leverage piece that needs to be funded in order for them to get to a place where they can provide this specific technical education. And I'll say when it comes to what should and should not be allowed, I'm going to speak very clearly that all generative AI, some of it is abusive, right? And there needs to be conversations about how it's being used in a sexual and degrading bullying manner, which I do think is something you can do very, very quickly, right? You can very quickly say it is illegal for adults and young people to create fake AI generative nudes of, you know what I'm saying, of their classmates. And that is not a red herring because I wrote an article recently and it is saying that 9 out of 10 girls have either been victim or know a young girl who has been victim of AI nudification in these fake, you know what I'm saying, these fake generative news that are being created. So if you want to do a big leverage stop, it's there. I will say don't overcorrect and say the punishment is jail time, right? Because then you'll have a lot of young people in jail when you're criminalizing a lack of consent and understanding around how generative technology works. But I'll say you can do both bookends, right, Representative Parker? No, there should be no AI notification. How do we solve that? But then also, what do the educators in your district say about what they need to correct these fundamentals?
Hey, Senator Watson, you had a question.
Thank you so much. And if you're talking about the educators, you got to also, before the senator jumps in, talk about all of our educational unions. I'll digress and give it to the senator.
Thanks, Representative. Go ahead, Senator.
Yeah, thank you so much. And all of the comments thus far very, make a lot of sense. But we're talking about closing gaps and expanding opportunity. And I think there's a lot more fear around AI than what the possibilities really look like. And there's a couple things. I used to be on the school board 20 years ago. And I remember when we had to deal with ensuring people of color had internet access. This is no different. We needed to make sure everybody had internet access, to make sure everybody was playing from the same level field. And AI is no different. It has the ability to really be a game changer. So look, what can AI do in the schoolhouse? It can provide personalized tutoring 24 hours a day, additional academic support for students who may not have access to private tutors, translation services for multilingual language learners, accessibility tools for students with disabilities, as well as career preparation skills for tomorrow's workforce. The other thing AI can do, it can also magnify existing inequities if we don't approach it properly. Now, I take umbrage with the use of the phrase black and brown, because when you lump black and brown together, it hides inequities that exist in the Black communities. And the way we typically do things as legislators, we say black and brown because it's expedient. We try to build a cohort because we believe we have, shared issues we need to deal with. But if we're very specific, Black folks have more challenges than the rest of these other subgroups. And so when I talk to folks, I like to separate out Blacks because I want to see how Black folks are performing. All right, I care about everybody, but how are Black folks performing with respect to being a legislator? Our job is to put the guardrails around it to make sure kids are protected, but make sure we do not stifle innovation. And my background, AI is what I do each and every day. I'm sitting here in the car because I work for the National Security Agency. So all I do all day is look at different AI models. And we keep saying ChatGPT. AI is so much broader than ChatGPT. There are over 1,000 large language models that have very specific functions. And I did mention, functions about translation for the multi-language learners. The key issue for us as legislators and also for the various state boards of education with respect to policy making is ensure their criteria for teachers to be trained and teachers to be innovative and also engage those third-party vendors who utilize AI to create products. You know, I looked at a study one time and they were challenging standardized tests and said, oh, the standardized tests are not fair for Black kids because, a lot of Black kids can't afford to go, on family vacations and see some of these things. Well, guess what? With AI, you can go almost anywhere. You can see almost anything. You can experience it in ways that, we never had the ability to do when we were in school. And these are the things that we really need to talk about when it comes to closing the gaps and expanding education opportunities. In Prince George's County, where I'm from, predominantly Black, we have put record-breaking amount of money into education, and we have not seen the achievement gaps close. We just have not seen it. And the challenge we have to face as legislators is how much more money are we going to start pouring into this? But we recognize that money doesn't solve the issue. It's about access, and more importantly than anything else, it's the structure that the child has to get to when they're outside of the classroom. What happens at home? What else are they exposed to? And those are the types of things that we have to really think about in addition to utilizing technology and its advances and the promises thereof to make sure that we're able to succeed in closing the achievement gaps so each and every child can graduate and be college and career ready.
Yeah, thanks, Senator. I have Delegate Nkongolo also jump in. I think you have a question or a comment.
Yeah, I have several comments, but I wanted to take more time to listen rather than speak. But I just want to thank State Representative Parker and my good colleague in the Maryland General Assembly, Senator Watson, for their comments. I just want to say, I'll start with something that Senator Watson said. When he talked about the difference between Black American students versus other brown students, I have challenged that even in the Maryland General Assembly, where I have actually tried to submit, whether it be legislation or amendments for foundational Black Americans, but I was always told I needed to tackle on minorities. Okay, I know the difference because I'm a foundational Black American who grew up in poverty in a single parent household versus my children who has an African father who grew up in a household where they were read to, where they were nurtured and they were offered structure and guidance that I didn't have. So I see where our kids, this generation, they have an advantage because they have this information and AI at their fingertips that we didn't have. However, they don't have the structure at home. And that's something that we just can't legislate. If I'm going to be honest, we cannot legislate away a lot of the things that are happening in communities. And I always try to encourage families to step up and give them the tools and resources, because that is probably the most protective factor for any child, is what happens at home. The other thing I wanted to mention too is historically, Senator Watson talked about, the 2000s, early 2000s, when the internet, or maybe even the late 90s, we can go back historically even further than that. When we think about how segregation, integration came to be, where, Black students were taught from outdated books, from torn books. We can look at the 70s and 80s. I don't know if you all remember Good Times, where they had the encyclopedia episode. Encyclopedias were the go-to when kids didn't have access to libraries or didn't have books at home. The 90s and the early 2000s, where computers were a big thing. I was still using a word processor because I couldn't afford a computer. But I think that we need to look at the advantage that AI does bring, but we also need to look at the fundamentals that State Representative Parker talked about, is making sure that our kids can read from a book, can open a textbook, can go to a library, know how to pull out a book and check out a book, have a library card. Those fundamentals are important, and we have to strike a balance between the two.
Yeah, thanks, Delegate. Debbie, before we end, Rafik, I wanted you to jump in on also some of the conversation we've been having. Debbie, if you would, real quick, if you could introduce the lawmakers, because we've had them jump in with some insights and questions, and I think that this is the moment to go ahead and do that.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say welcome to Delegate Latoya Nkongolo, representing Maryland's 31st Legislative District, Representative Dorisha Parker, who represents Pennsylvania's 198th Legislative District, and she's also the vice chair of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, and to Senator Ronald Watson, who represents Maryland's 23rd Legislative District.
Hey, thanks so much, Debbie. Rafik, you've been listening to quite a bit from both the experts who wrote that piece in Word in Black about Black students and AI, and also from the policymakers themselves. Give some insights as the leader of a current charter school, because we've been talking a lot about public schools, but give your insights as the leader, the founder and leader of a public charter school, and what you all have been doing in terms of implementation of AI, how you've all been adapting to it.
Yeah, this discourse is really present in all the issues that are being raised. And one of the things that occurs to me is when we talk about AI, and what I hear underneath all of this is an urgency to ensure that, particularly, I'm going to say, when I say our people, I'm referring to Black people, but I'm really all of our young people, that they are not somehow disadvantaged or left behind. And so the question for me is, what are we really trying to solve for? And I think sometimes as we think about whether it was the encyclopedia when it was emerging as a new piece of technology, right? Whether it was the set curriculums that were produced, because folks, practitioners didn't always have set curriculum that told them exactly what to teach and to kind of close that content knowledge gap. That was a piece of technology. We now have AI, which is another piece of technology. So I think part of the question is, what are we solving for, and what are we truly worried about? In our particular practice, we try to start from first principles. And so I think what we're worried about is whether or not this technology will obscure the skills that our young people need to build, and whether or not it will obscure the kind of growing expertise that we want our teaching practitioners to develop over time to be able to serve our young people, whether or not it's going to somehow fool us into thinking that our young people or our teachers are doing something that they're not. And, I think on some level, as I said, there's always been the presence of this technology. I even wonder whether or not, when we think about what's really fundamental, if we're even having the same conversation. No one worries that when a young person gets this device, that they know exactly what to do somehow. They can find it. They may not be able to identify what that blue is on the map, because that map is not a part of their quality world. It's not a part of their everyday world. But when they go to TikTok, they know how to get there. Somehow, I don't know how to get there half the time. I don't know how to use these particular devices. There are levels and types of literacy that we actually don't really identify, because most of our practitioners aren't really trained in the neuroscience behind how our brains work, how we learn new things, how we become these critical thinkers, which is the North Star for all of us, whether it's a critical thinker in terms of our civics, whether it's a critical thinker in terms of our economics, whether it's an opportunity and ability to analyze the world around them and to make decisions to navigate conflict. When we think about those things as the fundamental skills, well, AI can never replace any of that. That is the human work that we need to be engaged in. But that doesn't often seem to be the main topic of our discourse. So at our school, what we endeavor to do is to put what is the human parts of what we need to do, how we need to prepare our young people, how do we put that at the center? And if we ask that question, everything else is in service to that. How we train our practitioners becomes in service to that. How they make use of AI becomes in service to that. Just one quick example. We had this big debate about whether or not we were going to allow our high school students to make use of the generative AI as they prepare their work and as they submit their work, particularly when it comes to their writing. And ultimately, what we decided to do was everything that's typed and written must be defended orally. So we created this set of inquiries that are practice. So if you want to submit a paper and you've cited it and it's produced by whatever source, you have to actually be able to defend and represent and analyze and explain and answer questions like we're doing here about everything that you proffered. This is a piece of human technology, our discourse. And so I think the way that if we think about this, if we properly place this and we look at AI like it's just another tool, it's another advance from the encyclopedias to set curriculums to AI, I think we can maybe turn the temperature down a bit on whether or not this tool is going to change everything and focus more on the human experience that we know our young people are having, and that how do we support them in navigating and thriving in this world. So I just wanted to kind of pull that through, Charles, like this, so to make sure that we center what is the human experience that we're most concerned about, and then how do we make use of these tools to make sure that our young people are being empowered properly.
Yeah, thank you everyone for that. So I'm curious, just to kind of depart from our questions that we had for you. I'm thinking through this idea of the racism of low expectations and what that means in terms of introducing technology into these Black and Brown communities, and what role does that play in the idea that our students aren't seeing, that like our students don't know what the water is on a map, or what a map is, or how to read a map. And then technology itself, having a reader or a tablet with a book on it, does that make a difference between trying to understand technology as a separate piece of this conversation? And this goes to anyone on the panel, anyone of the legislators and or our experts.
The first thing that came to my mind is Schoolhouse Rock. And one of the things that I really miss during this day and time is Schoolhouse Rock. Because today, the way a lot of things are coming in, because the first thing I'm thinking of what you just said based on your question is the whole elimination of DEI. So even when we're talking about legislation and how I can earmark it for certain Black and Brown people in my district, that's already going to be struck down because I'm using the terminology of the word Black and Brown. And the fact of also when we talk about Pennsylvania, and I represent Philadelphia, we only have a 1-seat majority. God willing, I hope we flip more seats in November. God willing, I hope we flip the Senate so then we can be the trifecta like Maryland. But until then, I got to talk about real conversations based on what you're saying, and what does that also mean for the historical funding that still goes from, Pennsylvania based on what you're saying. I think we got to be more creative in how we do our granting to make sure that our Black and Brown. I just need to hear from parents. I mean, damn, I just need a parent to corner me, you know what, Rep. Parker, such and such is going on. Why haven't you funded so that Johnny can get this? Or why can't I get this? Or why do I always have to hear about gun violence prevention when it ain't preventing anything? But I would rather understand, why can't we get the resources to make sure Johnny can read, or that we have money for autism or money for that? That's what people like me get frustrated. It takes a gun violence or a shooting, and then the town halls are packed. But once that part is gone and the yellow tape is gone and there's no, news reports, no press conferences, no cameras, then it's crickets again. I have the 5th Blackest district out of almost 203 in the House. So to me, I'm going to always be unapologetic about making sure Black people in my district get what they rightfully deserve. And I'm going to also make sure I fight and get it to get it done on the finish line. But I need our people to step up and understand that the war is against them, because we want to make sure that they're educated and that we're properly funding them. That's the part that I'm getting frustrated at right now.
And real quick, I'd like to transition to, and the conversation is now open. We've opened up the floor, it seems. So if you have any questions or comments, as we're still going through our special micro summit conversation, a curated conversation here with the Council of State Governments Eastern Regional Conference. Monica Jenkins, you are currently, I believe it's Assistant Director, correct, of Technology Integration at the Prince George's County Public School System. So talk a little bit about that, because I'm assuming that you're in the midst of AI implementation.
We are. We've been preparing for AI for some time now, pretty much since AI came out. We've been making sure that we are making sure our process is thoughtful as we move forward, thinking about what needs to be in place, both at the policy level and governance, as well as preparing our educators to make sure that they understand AI literacy and what that means for them as we move into what it looks like for our students. So at this point, we have been making sure that we have our policies in place. We've piloted different things to see what will work and what works well for our students and for our teachers. And we are implementing an AI literacy series for our educators to make sure that they understand some of the things that were brought up here, some of the things about bias, PII, making sure that information isn't included, how it can shape education and instructional strategies, how it can support personalized feedback and learning. So all of those things are things that we are currently working on and implementing within our school system. I also have my colleague here from academics, Dr. Sandra Rose, and I'll let her chime in as well around what we're doing instructionally with our students, but for our teachers and preparing our ecosystem, that has been something that we have been focused around.
Thank you, Monica. Hello, everyone. Sandra Rose here. We've been really working on anchoring instructional power moves for teachers and to provide that instructional guidance around that. And it sits into 3 buckets for us as we're trying to plan out our curriculum. And it's how do you use AI to thoughtfully and intentionally create content and customize that content for students, and making that pedagogical shift when we're talking about less about static assignments, but showing students how to really amplify these critical thinking skills with AI. And then looking at the use of AI for strategic differentiation. And so how do we help to really personalize the learning in the classroom for students, and creating a balance between, if you've leveraged AI thoughtfully and provided an opportunity for students to critically think, publicly speak, problem solve, right? How are you doing that now in the classroom with students, where we're untethering them from these particular tablets and assignments that they're working on, so that they're using these natural skills and in context of learning the content, and then using AI to enhance the feedback loop. A lot of the times that our students don't show growth, they don't show growth because they're not getting feedback in an ample time. Teachers are inundated with 240 students on a roster. And so if we can leverage AI to use that as the feedback loop, now students are able to move from one learning content to the next because they're receiving that feedback in a timely fashion and really getting through that paperwork mill that teachers are sort of mired in trying to provide students with these opportunities for feedback. And so ensuring that balance in the classroom is our priority now, as we're trying to create some really mindful examples to provide teachers in the AI literacy series and to support our administrators as they're monitoring that instruction.
Monica, Sandra, thanks for sharing those insights. And I think that's very important, hearing from a public school system that's somewhat diverse, because it's about, I believe, over 50% Black and over 40% Latino. So it's very important to hear from a public school system like that, that has that kind of diversity. Julian, you had a question or a comment.
Yes, I want to lift up what I think Dr. Jenkins and Dr. Rose said, is that they started with a pilot, right? And I think the pilot is very important because, as we've said, demographics look different of the students. Demographics of the teachers look different. I'm in New Orleans, where we're all charter network, right? When I started teaching, almost all of the new teachers were my age, right? And the parents look different. And I think that also goes to Senator Watson's point about using it as a language learning tool, right? As a translation. What is the way that AI can specifically and highest leveragely support your young people, right? And that is not going to be the same for people who have demographics that are different. That's not going to be the same for people who have different socioeconomic levels, right? And so I don't know, I'm not going to put you all in the spotlight to share your research and work, but I think some of the difficulty here is that we're talking across an entire region where we think there are a lot of similarities that mean you can plug and play what PG County did over here, and you can plug and play this here, and that's actually not true, right? And so we need to figure out what specifically is needed by educators, what is their gap. And Dr. Parker, to your point about parents, how can we add parents into this conversation, right? Where can parents feel like they're supported? It's not going to be 100% of your parents when you start, but can you start with a mighty warrior of 4 or 5 parents who are saying, like, I actually really care about this. I have enough sway to turn the tides, right? Where can the union step in? You know what I'm saying? Like, and they can be the loudest voices. And something like a pilot will actually increase community like insight, input, and their actual desire to do it, because you invested them on the front end. And I'm sure Dr. Jenkins and Rose can speak to how that is actually with educators, with students, as opposed to just giving them something and telling them to go and implement it.
Cammie?
Thank you all so much for these points. I, as our folks from Prince George's County were talking, I'm really excited because I started my teaching career in Prince George's County. I taught Head Start in Prince George's County. And so as I've been hearing so many comments. The undercurrent that I keep hearing is literacy, right? Literacy, not just AI literacy, but literacy in all of its forms, the ability to read, write, speak, and most importantly, because reading is comprehension. And so in thinking about like what reading success looks like, I think some of that undercurrent of hesitation and fear is this knowing that perhaps all of our students are not those fluent readers that they need to be able to critically use AI. So I think before we can even have a conversation, not have a conversation about AI, but support AI implementation, are we confident in knowing that our students have all the variables for reading success? Have they built those foundational skills in alphabet knowledge? Or have they built those foundational skills in phonological awareness, the ability to detect and manipulate sounds? Are they able to rapidly identify and name objects and colors? Do they have a strong phonological memory where they can hold small bits of information in their brains? And then we can support students in being able to use AI as a tool, because as several folks have said, that AI is a tool, is not a replacement for our own individual critical thinking. And it also made me think about AI usage in early childhood spaces. I often hear conversations around AI in terms of oftentimes like secondary school or upper elementary, but students as young as 4 or even younger are being exposed to generative AI. And typically that's through AI generated content via videos. Kids love to scroll on phones and tablets using these videos. So kids at younger and younger ages are being exposed potentially to misinformation, which is at their fingertips. So I've been thinking a lot about like how are we supporting families in understanding how to vet certain content to make sure that children as young as 2 years old are not being exposed to misinformation, because children's brains are growing and developing rapidly in that early childhood space from birth to 5. And more children have access to cell phones and technology. And so because the brain is wiring, we want to make sure that the brain isn't wiring information in incorrect ways. So how are we supporting early childhood educators and those involved in the early childhood space to support children in being able to navigate that world as well?
We have a question or comment here from Matt Lyons. He's also our new CSG East Executive Director. So Matt, you have the floor.
Thanks, Charles. And I see Rafiq has his hand up too, so I want to make sure we get to him. But real quick, I just want to thank Charles, Debbie, this whole group for this conversation. For me, this has been a great learning opportunity, and I think a really healthy discourse. I'm going to admit I was having a little bit of deja vu, and I'm going to age myself a little bit, and that as I was hearing this conversation, I was going back to the days when we started having our TI-83 calculators introduced in the classroom, and all of the panic and drama over what's allowable, when can we use this, how can you use this, what games were kids downloading on their TI-83s. And yes, I did play my Snake game for sure as a kid back then. But as I was thinking about that, one thing that I was reflecting on is, I think this is really, a question or kind of commentary for folks that I'd love to hear more from our speakers and participants is, think this isn't new, introducing technology into the classroom. Obviously, with artificial intelligence, Gen AI, like the stakes are higher and that's more powerful. But I'm curious where folks feel like we've gotten it wrong in the past that has led to gaps that have been created when we're here in this conversation talking about what we need to close. And what can we learn from that might inform what state policymakers should be thinking about today as we're confronting this issue. So would welcome any perspective there. And again, thank you for letting me join and sit into this conversation.
That makes me think about like over-reliance on any tool. Like when you over-rely on something to overcompensate for what is a gap or potential gap, that it can swing the pendulum in the opposite direction. And so, for instance, as an educator, if I'm trying to figure out how to support my students with a particular standard, instead of like knowing how to parse apart that standard and understanding what the standard is asking me to do as an educator to support that child, what is the potential outcome for that student out in the standard? Instead of me having that foundational knowledge, I might say, you know what, I'm just going to plug and chug this into whatever generative AI tool and let it do all the work for me. And because of the biases that we've been talking about, that has the potential to pop out some inaccuracies that may not be able to support the specific learners in your particular classroom. And so I think the over reliance on any tool can have a negative impact.
Yeah, if I could just underscore what Cami just shared, I think over reliance on any tool is dangerous. And I think we run the risk that the introduction of AI will have the same impact that the senator referred to earlier as the introduction of money. We will conclude that it makes no difference because the outcomes won't change. And it's because what we're really not focused on, what I think is the core, in my experience, has been the core driver of these persistent gaps. And that to me is the lack of efficacy and practice from our practitioners. All of these things that we've created, right, they continue to obscure the fact that there is not an increasing expertise on how we help human beings develop into adulthood and a focus on what that means to do that. One of the things that I observed, the creators of this so-called technological advancement, what are they doing with their children in their households and in their families? And what we are not seeing them do is rush them to AI, these things that they've created. And, again, I think it's just instructive to just take a look. Not that, the sister's absolutely right. Like, all of our communities are different. The needs for our Black children are different than the needs for our Latino children. The needs for our children from Ecuador and El Salvador are different than the needs from the kids from Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. So I think we've got to just be aware. But this is what the neuroscience would actually lead us to really lean into. But I think that there is something instructive about really looking to what are some of the decisions that are being made by the very people who are creating these technologies. And they are staying analog for as long as possible. And why? It's because these analog experiences are the things that help our brains really develop in really powerful and highly effective ways. I'm not anti-technology. I don't want to sound like that at all. I think AI is very powerful tools for lots of the reasons that we named. But I think this is where the legislation can really happen. I think there's a reason that we are seeing our peers in Australia, Europe, and a bunch of other places around the world ban social media for children under the age of 15. They are moving in a direction. Now, again, this is America. We don't typically ban things other than books, but that's another conversation, another podcast. I do think that it is important for us to consider what are the limitations that we are going to encourage our practitioners to have when it comes to using these tools. There is not a standard. There's no ethical code that I've seen for teaching practitioners when it comes to working with our kids that would even provide a guideline to say, let's not rush to introduce this technology between the ages of 4 and 10. That's an ethical guideline, right? It's not a yes or no. But I think perhaps this is where our legislators can help and where our unions and other organizations can help. If we started to establish something like a set of ethical guidelines that gives a roadmap for how we might get use of these things, we can then avoid the trap that Sister Cami identified earlier. How do we overuse or underuse some of these particular tools?
Can I jump in real quick and say that sometimes technology is circular, right? We try to use AI to create the essay, to create the answer, and then we just stand up and present. When presentations were what was college normally about, right? Originally, you use the calculator too much, and then you go back to rote memorization of your times tables. You see what I'm saying? Like, sometimes it actually does go back to the basics, and then you end up where you started to some degree. I just wanted to jump in and say that. And we've seen that at the university level. Teachers saying no phones, no tablets, no computers, sit here and write this essay and then argue it and defend it, which it technically is not using generative technology, right? And so I wanted to use that to layer on to what Rafiq said. And then I'm going to stop.
Yeah, thanks, Julianne. We've got a round of questions, comments from the legislators. I'm going to start with Delegate Nkangolo.
Thank you, Charles. And I just want to point out when I believe it was Rafiq had talked about how other countries are maybe, doing things differently or maybe even outpacing American students. If we look here in our own backyard, in fact, Hispanic students are outpacing Black students when it comes to reading. And also, they have an advantage because they are bilingual. So, we have to look at what's happening in that community that's not happening in the Black community. And maybe I focus a little bit too much on the Black community only because of my own personal experience. And I want to say, to Matt's point, he talked about where did we drop the ball, or what happened. I'll say that I don't think that we've had any programs that have incentivized academics of reading, maybe since my generation. I grew up, I went to elementary school in the 80s, and there was a program, I'm not sure if you all are familiar with it, but it was called Book It. And the Book It program incentivized reading for elementary students, particularly elementary students in poor or underprivileged communities like myself. And I could honestly say that program incentivized me because we got a coupon for a personal pan pizza at Pizza Hut every time we read 7 books. And I can tell you that program made me an avid reader. To this day, I still read and enjoy a box of pizza. And I think that that's the problem, is that we don't incentivize reading. We don't incentivize parents even getting involved. I had even suggested a pilot program here in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, where we offer gift cards for parents to come into the classroom, to volunteer, to maybe read books to students. But I think that we have to look at what was once old, making it new again, and incentivizing academic achievement and excellence in reading and some of those fundamentals. We should reconsider those programs as well.
Mhm. Thanks, Delegate. Representative Parker.
Thank you, Delegate. One of the things that I'm interested in also talking about is how I'm looking at what's been happening federally. So because we're talking about it on this panel, many of us know that as it relates to AI or ChatGPT, or as my good senator is in his car and I'm in my car, there's things that's already advanced, that's already teed up, that's going to be passed. So what I always try to tell the individuals on these panels is we should not be reactionary. What are our action steps? And our movement, as our brother Malcolm X says, we just should not be televising a lot of these things, because this is what they're trying to do when they fast track to eliminate certain degrees that are not going to be counted when people graduate from college. This whole movement to eliminate Black excellence and Black education has been intentional by this 2025. So as we're here as educators, what are we doing to educate our parents as it relates to civics? Because every 6 months, there's a consequence. And when individuals decide not to vote and not to decide to be involved, this is why we're on these Zooms to say what is going to happen, but what is already written. I'm very concerned about one of the legislations that I know we passed in the House, basically that stating that, lawmakers, families can't be benefits, cannot get proceeds from certain things when they get done. And that's one of the things that I'm concerned about when we're talking about our lawmakers in the federal government. They're not leaving government. They're leaving multimillionaires, and some of them are billionaires in there now because of the stock trading and certain things that we're doing. So what are the protections are we going to be putting in place that we can build up our generational wealth for our Black and brown communities, as we know the attack is on us to be eliminated? And we know this, and then as we're talking about this in an educational standpoint, what are the safety measures that are being put in place? Right now, as we speak, we have another gentleman who was arrested for doing another attack for our lawmakers. We just went through this in Pennsylvania, that he was on social media and did an attack for 30 of our lawmakers. So what are we doing to protect each other in this time that you're talking about AI, when individuals are being very strategic and very smart on what they're doing to target individuals like us that are being intentional to make sure that these policies are passed and in place, and that we make sure that we're paying for unapologetically of our Black and brown communities. Thanks.
Okay, Senator Watson. Thank you, Representative.
You guys have turned this into a fireside chat, which I really, really love. Look, let me say a couple things. One is, take the technology out. Take it out of the discussion. What are we not doing that has failed to close the achievement gap? And that's a very, very important question, because whatever it is, we've been failing our Black kids. What we're doing in the state of Maryland, we put a law in place. I think it goes into effect 2028 that says we will stop social promotion. And if a child is not reading at grade level and by the 3rd grade, they're not going to pass the 3rd grade. Now, that's something very new. And I will tell you, in Prince George's County, we've done a lot of social promotion. And so we have kids that continue to graduate, not adequately prepared, and certainly not prepared to compete, on the world stage. Now, that's an issue, and that has nothing to do with technology. That's about the pressure to increase graduation rates. That's in pressure, from the state to want to show progress and that your state is doing what it needs to do, but it's failing kids in the process. So I wanted to say that and put a pin in it. Going back to an education framework, there's 6 pillars. And again, I got to put my legislative hat back on, because I tried to put a bill in place, and everything we talk about with AI and advanced technology has heretofore been talking about student use, teacher use. But what important group are we really not addressing at all? It's the people who make the decisions about our kids. It's our school board members. They're not held accountable to any standard. I put a bill in place that requires them to go through annual AI training, not about using ChatGPT, but about AI governance, about biasness in data, about procurement practices, and those things that they have to really understand when they bring a new technology into the classroom. Does it protect student privacy? Does it remove bias? Is it an educational value? Is it secure? Is it accurate? All the privacy protections. Make sure the vendors don't exploit student data, and parents understand how it's used, and accountability is maintained, and that there's still sufficient human oversight with respect to special education decisions, student placement, discipline, grades, and continuous evaluation. We spend so much money on different tools in our school systems and never go back to really check using the metrics. Is this meeting the intent that we expected to receive? So these are some of the things that, as a legislator, we need to help the school boards put their arms around to make sure they're doing what they can do. Look, at the end of the day, as a legislator, my primary goal after balancing the budget is bring home the bacon so that local government can move forward, right? Without being too overly prescriptive, because we always get into the battle, with our school board. It's an unfunded mandate. We can't do this. We can't do that. But we have to find that middle ground where we continue to put our children first in this thing. And if I look at AI as a tool, then I still have to go back fundamentally. What are our educators missing? And I have to add in what are our parents missing? Because in Prince George's County, I will tell you, the mindset is send my kids to school and the school will raise our kids. We have too many parents who put so much reliance on the school system to figure everything out. And our parents have forgotten that being parents requires sacrifice. This is not something that can be fixed with legislation. This is a cultural norm that has to be changed and modified. And one of the delegates said it 20 years ago, Blacks were outperforming Hispanics in reading. That has flipped. Now, how has that flipped? Because what my PGCPS folks tell me is that the Hispanics are taking total advantage of all of the tools at their disposal, put in place for English language learners and after school learning and those types of things. But also remember, in that culture, there is a very strong nucleus, of the traditional family. Mom, dad, grandmom is in the house. So there is structure there. The kids are not left out on their own. There's structure. So a lot of these issues, if we're going to really be honest about really helping Black kids and moving the ball forward, has to come down to the community of Black folks making decisions and changing the norm. I know most of us on this call, when we came up, school and church were number one priorities. And you didn't want to piss off God, you didn't want to piss off your parents, and you better do good in school. That has all changed and gone out the window. And we have to figure out how to bring that back if we are going to see the success we expect, from our own subgroup and population. That's what I wanted to say. Thanks, Charles.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Julianne, you had a point or also a question to make.
Yes, the one of the last things I want to say is when we talked about Matt asked, what did we get wrong? And then Rafiq brought something up about not something up, right? He brought up the importance around human connection. We do have to understand that one of the things that we did get wrong was our letting our young people use AI to replace human connection and emotional regulation and emotional stability, right? There has been a large instance of Black young children who are feeling very negative self-esteem and negative thoughts, turning to generative AI platforms for emotional and psychological help. That has been proven. There's also been, Matt, when you talk about what's wrong, we cannot then have counselors who are also using it to understand and accept and differentiate treatment. And that has been seen on both sides, right? And so when Rafiq talks about ethical guidelines, I think there's a very clear conversation around how can we teach counselors, right, who are integral parts of our classrooms, right, integral parts of the school community, what to do about AI? Because there's a very real rise, right, of AI being used, one, to treat mental health, but also as a tool to inform extremism. And it is very important for us to understand that Black men are also targets of extremist propaganda, right? And so if you ask AI something simple, who won the 2020 election, based on the worldview, it can give you different answers, right? And I use that as an example to say that imagine what a young person who is feeling negative self-thoughts, negative talk, negative home life, if they're asking ChatGPT very specific questions. And this sounds like I'm scaring people, but there's literally been data where young people say, should I unalive myself? Should I try to harm other people? Right? And we have to be very clear about the ethical guidelines and data around that. And that is something, and that is a place where legislators can take a stand, right? One, how do we give young people what they need? But then two, how do we make sure the young people, the adults who serve them, are also not feeding their insecurities, feeding their mental health data to something like any type of bot, right? I say chat, but it literally could be anything. And I hope that we're taking that, into concern, and we're taking that as a really high indicator of the mental health crisis of Black men, specifically young boys in our schools, and what we've gotten wrong and what we can do forward. And that's something I think that can happen immediately.
Tammy?
In thinking about the achievement gap, I think sometimes what's overlooked is not just the achievement gap, but the opportunity gap. Do students have not the ability, but are they given the chances or the opportunities to be able to access AI or various technology tools, if you will? Case in point, when I was in high school, I wanted to go to a state school. I took the SAT twice, ACT once, and I remember going to my guidance counselor and I was like, oh, I want to apply to these schools. She looked at my test scores and was just like, oh, I don't think you should go to that school based on your test scores. You should go to this other school. And I was like, oh, but I want to go to this school, right? And so had I listened to that, I would not have applied to that school and actually gotten into that school. And so my point is, sometimes when we are engaging with students with any tech tool or just access to different opportunities, our own personal biases can come into place based on a number that we see on a paper or a test score. So in thinking about the achievement gap, I also think about what opportunities or chances have students had to engage with this particular tool or engage in this particular course to be able to support them in their critical thinking skills and access of different opportunities and chances to do things beyond what they've been exposed to.
Thank you, Cam. The representative from Pennsylvania.
I was listening to something I forgot to let everybody know is we're talking about AI. One thing that I forgot to mention was we recently, from the House and the Senate, we passed a K through 12 cell phone ban. And I know we're working on a lot of different versions of it. And many of us got a lot of pushback as relates to this bill, or why did the bill even come up to even conversation? Well, I was getting contacted by many teachers that were saying that students were utilizing that ChatGPT to write their papers and their essays and all of that other kind of stuff. So the cheating mechanisms, instead of just doing it themselves, that was another thing that came out of this whole technology discussion. And I wrestle with it a lot. And I wrestle with it on the other side of it, that I do have a 10-year-old nephew in a predominantly white school in the suburbs. And the first thing that came into my mind is I did not want a legislation that he would not be able to contact any of us in the event of a shooter or something coming to their school. So as we're talking about technology, let's look at the other side. Charles, that's why I brought it up as it relates to how dangerous at times these cellular phones have become. And people like me it's really in the middle when we're talking about this overall, what do we do from here kind of moment. And I was just making sure that, whether I talk to the senator and anyone else on here, that this is something that Pennsylvania has done, that this is one of the items that our governor made. And we did get a lot of pushback from it because how we moved this legislation forward.
Hey, Representative, on that point,
Yes.
so you just talked about legislation passed in the House and Senate about cell phone bans. Senator Watson, you talked about in Maryland a legislation that's just been recently passed in the Assembly regarding competency, regarding the literacy amongst third graders, that they can't pass the third grade if they're not at a certain reading level. So do you all feel that in talking about passage of legislation, do you all feel, the legislators here on this call, do you all feel that you and your colleagues are knowledgeable enough about artificial intelligence, about this technology and the evolution of that technology to pass this type of legislation, to engage in these types of debates, this type of conversation that we're having right now?
I would start saying, look at people's campaign finance reports. I mean, for me personally, no, I am not up to speed where I need to be to make certain decisions. That's why I depend on CSG and talking to the people of color. I depend on NBCSL. I depend on individuals who are not lawmakers in these certain types of spaces, because what is eventually going to be happening to many of the lawmakers here, you're going to start getting what's happening when we go to NCSL conferences. You're going to get the Googles, you're going to get the Yahoos, you're going to get all of these big tech companies that want to start whining and dying lawmakers, and they want to start talking about legislation based on what we're saying. And I just always say that, and when these companies come, there's nobody that looks like me in these rooms that are trying to push this type of legislation. So I am very concerned in a lot of ways, but I don't fake it. And I make sure that I start to surround myself with individuals that aren't just lawmakers, but that are policy people, think tech driven individuals who can give me other sides of what's about to happen. Because Stevie Wonder can tell you that it's coming. It's definitely here. It's definitely going to be passed into law. But what does that actually mean for your neighborhood? And what does that mean if I'm 54? What does that mean for a K through 5 child that's coming up now? If we don't pivot to get it right, because based on what on the lawmakers said, there are no makeovers with this legislation right now, as according to your question, Charles. We're only going to have a one shot at it, and that's why a lot of us, especially in Pennsylvania, we still have not passed the legalization of marijuana, and we're still haven't passed our skill game. So that's why I'm saying it. When it comes to this technology, we're really going to have one shot at this, and we cannot have any do-overs. And that's the part to me that really bothers me the most.
Hey, stand by, Rafik. I just want to, as I'm asking that question or posing it to legislators, I want to hear from them first, and I'll go to Delegate Nkongolo, and then Rafik, I'll head up to you as well.
Right. I consider myself a lifelong learner, so no, I don't feel like I have the expertise to, craft any legislation at this point. But last week, in fact, I was at a AI summit in DC. So it was a legislative conference. So that was very educational. I know here in Maryland, I'll say me personally, I have not been wined or dined by big tech. But I will say that there have been a lot of talk around data centers and a lot of opposition around Maryland. Different counties are passing moratoriums, and there's a lot of people who are in support of data centers because a lot of them are being proposed in predominantly Black neighborhoods. In fact, I was told about one here in Anne Arundel County in a historically Black neighborhood where they're proposing a data center. So that's what we're having more conversations around. Obviously, data centers and AI are connected. But as far as being that knowledgeable, I'm still learning. I have my concerns. I do see some benefits to students being educated in incorporating AI. But that's where I am. I do not consider myself an expert.
Go ahead, Senator Watson.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm very comfortable with the increased use of AI in the classroom. And like I said, I live and breathe AI every day. My side job is to evaluate new and emerging technology for incorporation into state and local governments for efficiency, money savings, and for overall advancement and improvement, of the residences. Now, even though I'm comfortable with it, that doesn't mean blind acceptance, right? My main thing is to make sure that every student, no matter what background, has access to the technology in a safe, responsible, and equitable way. That's really fundamentally, what I care about. And, last week, I was on a panelist in a forum called the Blockchain and AI Technology. It was a week of training talking about blockchain technology and how we can leverage that to create new efficiencies, in the state of Maryland and among other things. The technology is here. It's not going anywhere. And there are numerous opportunities once folks understand the technology to have really, really great and soaring careers. Also in the state of Maryland, I serve on a joint committee for cyber, IT, and biotech. So we deal with this every session all the time. Now, last year, the year before, it was all about AI and deepfakes. We had to put something in place to make sure you can't just use somebody's likeness and image, because we literally had children who were being bullied online, and we had to do something about it. The problem with being a legislator in technology always moves faster than legislation. And so many times we're in reactive mode. Something happens, we have to react. Right now, we need to go on the offense and look ahead, because nobody wants to talk about it. And I know we like talking about our Black kids and how we're underperforming, but as a country, as a nation, we are behind other nations in accepting this technology and moving things forward. I work, as I told you, with National Security Agency. Of course, their whole issue is using AI, in the defense industry, in drones, in bombs, and all of those types of things. And understanding, how the technology works and to be able to create applications, with the underlying technology is really where the rubber hits the road, which is why I'm just so pumped up about having our kids learn about coding and being able to do the fundamental things, so that they can, get into these fields, these various fields. So I am very comfortable about it. I am always comfortable about talking about it. But remember, more than just ChatGPT, I'm exposed on a daily basis to different AI related tools that have specific and unique functions. And when I look at it, what can impact positively the multilingual person? What can really help somebody who's disabled or quadriplegic so that they can learn and they can travel, but can still get the experience of having traveled and done things and been certain places. The person who doesn't have any friends because they can't get out of the house, give them some kind of, agents or agentic framework built with the right parameters where they have people to talk to and help them learn about certain things. It's really going from the negative of all of these things to really what the positive opportunities can and should be with, again, from a legislator's hat, the proper guardrails and protection mechanisms around what we are allowing our kids to be exposed to.
Hey, thanks, Senator Rafiq.
That's actually a perfect point for me to underscore. Every time we talk about technology, I want to do what I can to make sure that we are always introducing the humanity and the humanity practice that sometimes gets left out. I think if we think about even our own educational experiences, or if we think about how we frame what the school day looks like, so much of that is framed around our young people's interaction with information and data. It's not really centered on the connection between human beings. It's not really centered on the impact of our choices through these different tools and the impacts that we have on each other in our communities. And so I just wanted to make sure that we continue to center our humanity? And how do we make that a part of our regular practice? The senator said earlier on about if we set aside all this technology and whatnot, and we get back to the fundamentals. Well, for me, the fundamentals is about human connection, whether it's the connection in our home lives, right? What is that group of human beings that we return to at the end of the day? What's the group of human beings that we're spending time with from the hours of 7:30 to 4:30 in the afternoon? If we do not really put at the center what is going to facilitate human connection in a way that's ultimately going to be ever more healthy and connecting, no matter how much technology we bring into place, we are not going to solve the very human problems that we have. And that's with our children in our community, and that's with our nation in general. And so I wanted to make sure that I just wanted to just reintroduce that. I know this is a conversation about AI and technology, but we have to talk about how we are best nurturing our humanity and using these tools in order to really effectuate that.
I wanted to bring, I think we have about several more minutes before we wrap, but I've got two more questions here, very important questions, just to bring in our school system, educators, administrators. This can go to either Monica or Sandra. What data should schools and vendors report to show whether AI is closing or widening those disparities for students of color? Are you using vendors now to do that?
We're using vendors. That's a very difficult question to ask. When you are speaking about closing gaps, because then the questions becomes which gaps and what are we focusing on as far as a district is concerned. Now, one of our major moves is to look at math and writing data within the district, and we do have intervention tools that we monitor where students are making gains with specific standards as it relates to the curriculum. Is it happening on a massive scale? It is. It's done through our research and research office, and looking at how our students are meeting our benchmarks and how those benchmarks are aligned to state standards for assessment. So as AI is in the mix, we're talking about what markers do we look at? Right now, it's usage data. Right now, it's how effective students are completing different assignments as it aligns to learning goals or learning outcomes, and whether or not those metrics are closing in on what the outcomes are that was created by those particular teachers who are piloting various tools. I know that sounds like really vague, but not being able to really speak to it at this moment is because we'd have to really zero in on a particular content area and or particular grade level to be able to speak to that more definitively.
Thank you, Sandra. That's helpful. I did have a question. This is posed to the policymakers who are here. Data centers. Delegate, you had mentioned that earlier. And so I wonder, I am very curious about this. Does that debate over data centers, because it's a big national debate. In fact, it's determining quite a few elections. It has, and it will continue to as we head into the 2026 midterms. But does that debate over data centers complicate the conversation that we're having right now about AI in classrooms? So could it be conflated, right? Where parents, as you're talking about introducing AI in the classroom, parents get very resistant to that because they're very resistant to data centers because they know that you need data centers to support AI. Any worries about that or concerns? I'll open up the floor.
It's interesting because when we're talking, we can say worried all we want, but data centers are coming. And they're going to be here. Now, the question is, does that mean that the power is going to be on the ratepayers? And what does the board of these utility companies look like? And that's a big concern, because why the big unions? And one of them in particular that's always on my phone is going to be talking about these data centers are going to be built are not going up right away. But when I mean right away, it's like a 3 to 4 year job, a 3 to 4 year project. So if data centers are coming, what does that mean for the people that are on these calls? What is the contract looking like? What are the people and the makeups of the unions that are going to be putting up these data centers? If they don't look like us, then what is our vote really going to look like? And that's really how Representative Parker always talks about. I'm unapologetically Black. I'm Black 365. I don't celebrate Black History Month because I'm Black and historic all the time. And I'm very clear when it comes to what this data center actually going to do, how it's going to drown out our Black communities. That's the concern. And I think because as they say in the hood, life be life in Charles. So folks are so inundated with everything right now with their utility bills, they can't even think about a center because they trying to figure out how they're going to keep all of the stuff coming on. So I say that to say they're coming. They literally are here. What does that look like for a lawmaker as it relates to what your vote is going to look like? Because we can debate all day, all night, but it's definitely going to be here. The challenge is going to be is what is my utility bill going to look like after it goes up?
Yeah, Senator, I definitely wanted you to offer or give some input on this because there seems to be some agreement here in this room, in this container, that one, AI use in the K through 12 classroom is here to stay, and two, we should embrace it. So do you worry about that data center conversation encroaching on that?
It only encroaches on people who don't know too much better. And let me put it like this. Look, in the state of Maryland, we have a 13-state grid system. It's called PJM. Maryland right now is subsidizing every data center that has been put up in the state of Virginia. And Virginia has the biggest footprint of data centers in any place in the world. All right. So every time somebody picks up a phone or gets on a computer and asks GPT a question or wants to stream a movie or anything, that data is in somebody else's data center. And they are seeing the benefits of the business tax revenue from it, where Maryland is not, because there's been so much fear mongering. Oh, it's only in the Black communities. That's a bunch of BS, because Loudoun County in Virginia, where all of these things are, there are very few Black people who live there. All right. Very affluent place, to the point where Virginia has a $2 billion surplus and Maryland has to grapple with a $3 to $4 billion deficit. All right. So that's the economics of this thing. Now, I serve on the Energy Education Committee, so I deal with the data centers every day. So what did we do to assuage the fears of the general public? We said if a data center is going to come to Maryland, they have to bring their own power. That mitigates the ability to raise rates when it comes. We said a data center has to use recyclable water. That mitigates the fear of the environmentalists who think that the water is going to get back into our potable water system. The only thing that left to be worked out is what is the minimum distance that it can be from residential, so that the residents don't have to smell any fumes, there's no vibration, and they don't have to hear any sound. So if that criteria cannot be met in the state of Maryland, they don't need to come to the state of Maryland. But I know in some of the southern areas where there's a lot of agricultural land, we can support that. But one thing I do know, in the state of Maryland, we need new revenue sources. We need new ways to generate revenue, because our residents just cannot support any additional tax increases or increases in fees and those types of things. And so back to your original point, there is a difference between the data center argument and student achievement via AI. Whether we get a data center or not, our students are still going to have access to, these artificial intelligence types tools, and still can use those to help close achievement gaps. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, I'm going to take one more either question or comment from Julianne, and we're going to close this shortly.
Hang on. In light of everyone's time, we're at 1:32. And if everyone would like to stay another 5 or 10 minutes, we would love to have you, but I just want to make sure that everyone's okay in staying.
Thank you, Debbie. How are we looking? How is everyone's scheduling?
I got to get back to bake the donuts.
Yeah, I'm also on a tight schedule today. I apologize, but I've definitely enjoyed the conversation and, hearing from everyone and the different perspectives. I think this is important for us to have these conversations, just to hear all the sides and see how we can best come to a common ground for the benefit of our our children in education. So thank you all.
Yeah.
I will leave my contact information in the chat.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Senator Delegate. Really appreciate that input, especially from you, Senator, with that vast technology background that you have. Very curious to see what sort of legislation, I don't know, any ideas that or innovation that comes out of this conversation, if it in any way benefits you. So as you craft legislation on this topic. So thanks so much.
Thanks to each of you. I got to drop off, but I just want to really tell you how much I appreciate these kind of conversations. So thank you, and we'll talk soon.
All right, thank you. Julianne, you had one more point or question as
Yes, I just wanted to say that I think I understand that data centers are coming, but as somebody who had to help fight against a data center in our own backyard, right? We're talking about Louisiana, massive data centers that are being put here. I would encourage us to think about the human context of it all, right? I don't think this large, I don't want to politic, but I would just say, like, I don't think we have to say everything is coming, and how do we protect everybody and think about what that means for individuals who are on the ground. That's all I wanted to say. I didn't want to politic, but I wanted to push back a little bit against that idea.
And how it's going to impact certain demographics of people. That's something else to consider as well.
Mm-hmm. Hey, sis, the only reason why I say when I say things, I'm saying it as a definitive because this time of the year, all of the unions are having conferences. All of them are meeting. They do this every year. And this is not a topic. It's already done because the bills are already teed up because we already got the calls to oppose one of the data center bills. So I say things from a Pennsylvania standpoint because they're upset of the recent bill that we passed because they can't get money because of how we taxed it. So I can talk from a Pennsylvania legislator perspective, 1-seat majority, that our current governor has other aspirations. So when I say it, I can talk from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and how things are already happening because of the calls and the things that are currently happening. So I don't do smoke and mirrors. I give you real answers. You can look and see what's already been passed and how we move. I just try to tell people on the other side of us, instead of being reactionary, how we going to benefit and be multimillionaires. Because guess what? It's happening. And whether we like it or want to be philosophical or not, it's here. So I don't even talk about data centers coming. No, they're here. And it's the biggest people that are making the most noise in Pennsylvania are my royal colleagues because they have more of the land and they are trying to figure out how to get it in individuals like myself's district because our areas are like densely populated because the city, we're right on top of each other. So if they can find a way how to put it in the city, they would try to do it. That's why I try to say for us, it's a totally different dynamic.
Representative, I have a quick because I know that the public school union is rather prominent.
Yeah.
And somewhat dominant in public policy and political. So I'm wondering, have they had this conversation about AI in the classroom? What's their response been?
They have had conversations with us. They were very, they want to revisit the cellular phone ban with us. They want to talk about it. Their biggest thing with us was making sure the budget got passed because of the funding that they wanted us to get done because of these buildings that are closing and things that are a chopping block. So now that it's passed, we're revisiting a lot of their questions and asks to see what are the next steps to what this is going to look like from a policy perspective, from a union perspective, and downright to the teachers. So they have been bringing it up. I'm looking forward to meeting with a lot of them during the summer and through the fall, and we can just have these real frank conversations. I try not to do them with that type of population on a Zoom because, as they say, Big Brother's got receipts. I do it in person, so we can really so I can hold them accountable for certain things that I know is happening in my neighborhood when it comes to, after the budget is passed, Charles, you can't hold people accountable now. You know what I mean? Because the money is there. So they know the money is going to come to the various districts. I just know I can always keep that chip for certain things that they want for 2027.
All right. Yeah, we're conducting this a little bit like the World Cup final, extending time. Real quick, I do want to ask, and I'm throwing this out here to anyone here in the container, but especially Cammie, Cammie, excuse me, Julianne, and our educators, our administrators from the PG County school system. I've been hearing, speaking of the Philadelphia school system, Derisha, the representative, excuse me, there was a Washington Post article recently about the Philadelphia schools being closed or shuttered as a result of lower enrollment and placement. That's also happening in many school districts. And so how does that influence this conversation about AI usage? Cammie, Julian, have you looked at that? Is that a conversation that's taking place in your circles? Also,
Yeah,
Monica, Sandra?
we had a big school. A couple of schools are closing in New Orleans. And as some of you all know, New Orleans was one of the massive charter. People say takeover, but in influx. And so because of Louisiana is the top state in population decline, we're losing a lot of young people. And what that looks like is overcrowding in other classrooms, right? Which is exacerbating. I think Dr. Rose said, you already have a list of 120. And now this other school closed, those children have to be taught, right? They literally have to be taught. And a lot of times that isn't coming with an increase in funds. I worked at a school that was closed and I ended up going from 28 kids to 35 kids with no more resources, right? And so then you do have teachers who are even more in trouble. And so the work that they're doing at PGCPS would be helpful for me as an educator to know, right? Hey, I can actually call on this tool. I can actually use this because my young people do deserve feedback. It's not my fault I can't get feedback, but I do have to figure out how to work with what I've been given. And so I can see an opportunity or a space for greater reliance on our artificial intelligence and that type of technology.
I do want to say, though, we have to be really careful about how we couch this conversation, because I've seen different states that are bringing in robots to be teachers and utilizing other mechanisms to replace an educator in the classroom. And that's like swinging the pendulum to the total opposite direction. And so, for legislative purposes, it would be important to really vocalize that not be a stopgap for a shortage. Now, we've been experiencing shortages for years now, and enrollment has been dwindling across districts within our school district and nationally. And so we just have to really be mindful and thoughtful about what those components look like in lieu of having to deal with the attrition of teachers across the board. And a lot of the reasons why teachers are leaving the profession is because of the demand that's being put on them for all of the things that we have to solve problems for in the classroom, as well as the sheer amount of paperwork that is attached to teachers today now is almost unmanageable. And so helping folks to really understand how we have to support teachers in a way to be able to provide a really thoughtful learning experience for students really has to be anchored in the conversations that we're having for policy, as well as how we're supporting teachers monetarily across the states, as well as in the classrooms and districts.
Sandra, you guys, especially the educators, would be happy to hear that we recently in our state budget were able to make sure there was a COLA available for our retirees educators. And it took so long. They had literally been waiting 24 years for it. So child, don't get me started. We're a 1-seat majority in the House with a, Democratic governor, and we have the Republican Senate. And I say all of that to say for you educators, so don't give up hope in this type of that lawmakers are not doing their job. It did. And I can tell you the sense of relief that some of them are going to be here because they're going to, in a few weeks in August, their first paycheck, they're going to see a bump. But sadly, that some of these educators are not here, but their families will be able to benefit from this. So just know that there's some of us that are still fighting a good fight when it comes to how we feel what education really means and how it should be defined. But then also, Charles, the Washington Post didn't talk about this big money grab. So if you have schools that are currently closed and schools that are on a chopping block, so who really wants to benefit? Developers. So we know what the real meaning for what these schools are going to be. But does that mean it's going to close the budget gap or the deficit of Pennsylvania or Philadelphia when we're one county out of 67? And the other thing is, Charles, it's a $3 billion project. And of course, they want us to pay $1 billion. I mean, they want us to pay for all. So, you know me, kick rocks, because at the bottom line, we all knew that it had to happen as it relates to the closures of the school, the renovations of the school, and all of that. But you can't sit in my face and say there's going to be one school in freaking a district that's not mine. It's going to be a $63 million project when you're closing schools and certain schools don't even have pools. So for me, it's going to be a fight all the way around, Charles. But I think for this bigger conversation is the state, we're the big ATM when it comes to the counties, when it comes to education. We that's pretty much where we are. And I don't want that. I don't want to have that control back in our purview. I mean, it's still local control. So it has to be, the onus has to be on Philadelphia to do what they have to do. And it's also been a couple of proposals that some people want an elected school board as it relates to Philadelphia.
Representative, thank you.
You're welcome.
You're sure, Cammie? I think you have one more comment, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up this.
I think in Florida, I haven't heard a lot of conversation around AI usage in classrooms, particularly, but there's been conversation around Florida's, at least I'm in Broward County Public Schools in the Fort Lauderdale area, is launching how do I call it? Like a school bus safety program in partnership with Bus Patrol. So as students are getting ready to head back to school in a couple of weeks, district school buses are going to be equipped with automated stop arm cameras designed to detect and deter motorists who illegally pass stop school buses. And so that is an AI tool that I think is one example of an offering of how to use AI to support the health and safety of students.
All right. Thank you, Cammie. Fantastic discussion. Really appreciate everyone who was here and able to participate. That wraps this micro summit, and really want to thank you for joining us. Thank everyone else for watching, because we will be providing this on a multitude of platforms. We've been recording it for that purpose. We'd also like to thank the Council of State Governments Eastern Region for making this possible. I want to thank Matt Lyons, our executive director, our newly installed executive director, and I want to thank him for also being here throughout the duration of this conversation and for his comment earlier on. This has been a joint presentation by the CSG East Council on Communities of Color and also CSG East Education Committee. I want to thank Debbie Ann Page as well here for joining us. We hope she's the policy analyst for the Education Committee. We hope to see you all in Puerto Rico for our annual meeting, which is in December, from December 13th to the 16th. More info at csg-erc.org. Also want to acknowledge our experts here. We had Julian Lewis Anderson, also Cammie Hugley, who was also here, Rafiq Kalam Dean II, Esquire, also Monica Jenkins, Sandra Rose from the Prince George's County Public School System. State representative, our legislators, really want to acknowledge them as well. Great input from them, and I'm hoping that this conversation contributed to debates and conversations that they will have in their respective legislatures. State Representative Derecha Parker from Pennsylvania. Also, we had State Senator Ron Watson from Maryland and Delegate Latoya Nkongolo from Maryland as well. I'm Charles Ellison. I've been your host for this session, and Debbie Ann Page, your co-host. Thank you so much.